Hey, what's up, everybody? Chad Calek here, and welcome back to the In a Crowded Room podcast for part 2 of episode number 157. Which, before I finish this story, I just want to thank you all once again for all the incredible messages about 74 minutes. It means the world to me. I know you have a lot of questions about the film, which is awesome. There will be another Q&A down the road here, which I will address a lot of those, but I wanted to let you all know that if you have not seen the film, today is the last day that you can actually get a discounted viewing pass from AGH Television to watch the film on Vimeo On Demand. If you haven't seen the film, I think you will love it. As I mentioned before, through aghtelevision.com, you can get a $5 discount off the current Vimeo On Demand price. As always, the link to your discounted 74 minutes Vimeo On Demand viewing pass is in the description box below. Make sure you take advantage of this offer right now, because by the time the next podcast posts, this special deal will be over. Also, today is the last day that you can purchase our limited time offer to watch all 20 of my paranormal documentaries on Vimeo On Demand for less than $4 a film, which is a savings of over $80 if you were to buy them all individually. Today will be the last day that you can take advantage of that. Thank you so much to all of you who have purchased the All Access Pass to my entire 20 film catalog on Vimeo On Demand. Also, you get 6 months of access with that, so you can take your time watching each film, or if you want, you can binge watch my entire body of work. Trust me, you will have a blast with all 20 of these films. If you're into the paranormal, if you're into UFOs, conspiracies, it's all covered here. Once again, the link is in the description box below. And as I said, today is the last day that we are offering this special limited time offer. With that being said, let's get to the story. Where I left off, as you guys know, I had opened the door to see this little devil doll, not on the stairs, but directly in front of me, which unfortunately at this point, the doll was not discarded. It was not thrown away. You know, one of the worst things about these paranormal events that happen, if you're somebody like me who doesn't easily accept that these things are possible, despite the fact that, you're watching it happen, your mind goes to weird places because you just can't accept that this is happening, even though you know it's happening. And one of the worst things about this is the distrust that it builds amongst the family. Like, I know for a fact that my dad, would have never done anything to try to scare me. But I had distrust towards my mother. For a while I had it towards my brother. Granted, he wasn't there when this happened. But you start just thinking that, well, this can't be possible, so somebody has to be doing this. Even though you can go, wait a minute, there's no way, because my mom and dad went to bed and they were asleep, and there's no way, my mother's running around, with footsteps that sound like a little child from carpet to a linoleum floor in the kitchen. But it's weird what it does to your brain. You just become so distrusting, and you have a constant anxiety that builds inside of you. And this was it was just a really terrifying event at a really horrible time, because this is 3 days before Christmas. It was like 2 or 3 days before Christmas. So as you can imagine, as Christmas is coming, I'm not really thinking about Christmas. I'm thinking about the fact that there's something running around our house, and this little Christmas angel devil doll thing appears to have a mind of its own. And let me say this immediately. I do not believe that dolls can, become possessed or haunted or anything like that. And believe me, I spent hours with the Constantinos, because Deb Constantino totally believed that. And I had actually shared this story with her, and she was like, oh yeah, that's absolutely what happened. And I loved Mark and Deb. They were very good friends of mine. Incredibly unfortunate, what occurred with them. And, I certainly hope they found peace on the other side. But, so at that time, I'm sitting here going, there's no way that this little doll has some kind of soul, But what is going on? So as Christmas comes, I'm just thinking, you know what, man? I'm just going to have to stay up all night long. And the first time I hear these footsteps downstairs, I'm just going to take off screaming downstairs and try to catch this thing in action. If it's actually, running around, which again, I can't process it, but I'm hearing the steps, then I'm just going to have to stay up as late as I can. Well, thankfully, over the course of actual Christmas, nothing happened. There was no more footsteps, besides the doll just absolutely creeping me out every time I come home. I would see it. It's the first thing you'd see when you come in the door, sitting on that second step. And, it's just weird. It held this candle, like I said, that shot these shadows back on its face. But the way it held the candle, it just looked like it was holding a knife. It was just a weird grip, and its arm was bent in this weird way. Oh, man, God, this thing was creepy. And like I said, it had a movement timer, but it wasn't like it consistently moved. It's not like it moved its head and its arm comes up and it goes back, stops, moves its head and its arm come up. It was like every 40 seconds or so it would make like a movement, and then like 2 minutes later just its head would move, and then sometimes it was like even longer, like 3 or 4 minutes later just an arm would move. It was just the creepiest thing. I don't know who manufactured it. I don't know who made it. And the sheer size of it was just, it was, like I said, it was like 3.5, 4 feet. It was huge. It was a huge, huge doll with this white like dress that came out and poofed out on the bottom where you couldn't even see its feet. The dress went all the way like to the ground, actually hung over the edge of the stair. But as things often did in our house, it was really weird. For a long time, in my bedroom, in my ear, as I was falling asleep, I would hear the click of like a gun when you pull, like if you had a Colt revolver and you just cocked it back, that click, click, like when you cock it. And this thing terrified me. This went on for like a month. Like literally I would be just falling to sleep and I would hear it right in my ear, as if somebody like had a gun to my head. And it was the sound of like an old school revolver, totally like out of like those old school Westerns, right? And then it just stopped one time. I mean, it had me at the peak of fear where I was just terrified to go to sleep because I knew the second I would start dozing off, I would hear this, and it scared the hell out of me. And it stopped. And then about a year later, right as I've almost forgotten this, it's almost out of my head, it started happening again. So that was a common thing that would happen in the house. Things would happen that would terrify you, and they would go on for a series or a series of time, or a period of time, and then they would stop. And right when you would think, okay, maybe that's just over and that's done, it would happen. Just to almost like a reminder, I can do this whenever I want, type of thing. Well, that's what kind of happened with this doll, because a couple weeks went by, and like I said, beyond the fact of walking in the door and seeing this thing and being totally creeped out, beyond that, nothing really happened. So I'm starting to think, you know what? Maybe somehow, maybe my mom got up and went to the bathroom, and when I was sleeping, and she went out, to mess with me, and she moved the doll by the door. And again, none of this makes sense because, like I said, my mom wasn't running around downstairs like a child, and I couldn't hear the footsteps. Her footsteps didn't sound like a child's footsteps. But it doesn't matter. Like, as I replay all this stuff in my head, as a listener, I'm sure you're going, well, duh, that doesn't make sense. But again, I was not an accepting person of this stuff. I went from being completely atheist and not believing in anything supernatural, anything spiritual, anything paranormal, to an overwhelming amount of unbelievable paranormal activity happening. And my brain just couldn't fully accept it outside of in the moment. Meaning in the moment, like when I hear the footsteps running back and forth, I know what I'm hearing. But give anything enough time and your mind starts working on you, starts trying to tell you that it didn't happen, right? So I was like almost to the point where I was thinking there had to be some way that somebody's just messing with me. That's why it stopped for like 2 weeks. There had to be like some way. So finally one night I was hanging out at Laura's house, I get home at 10 o'clock, walk in, see that thing, gives me, just the creeps, man. I mean, I was literally thinking in my head, why is this fucking thing here? Just get this thing out of the house. Take my coat off, hang it up, go in, hang out with my parents for a while. I had school the following day. Christmas break was just ending. I remember that. So yeah, I lay down. Sorry, one second. So I lay down to go to sleep, and for some reason I couldn't sleep that night. I was just kind of tossing and turning, and it wasn't the doll, anything, wasn't on my mind. It was just, there's a lot of those nights in the house where things would just become uncomfortable, and you would just have anxiety, and I'm kind of, tossing and turning, and rolling around. Then I finally just find a position where I'm comfortable, in which I just happen to be comfortable, where I'm looking out my door into Katie's room, which was always kind of a scary place to look, but she was in there, and a lot of times I would just watch out for her. I mean, that was my biggest concern with her being in that room, is because when we picked the rooms, Brian picked his, I picked mine. At the time that my parents bought the house, we had not yet adopted her. So when she was adopted, it just became her room by default. It was the room we had. It was the only one. And it was by far the biggest room. It was 3-4 times bigger than my room or Brian's. And like I said, I had the smallest room in the house. So I'm laying and I'm looking outside, or looking through my door into her bedroom. And sure as shit, pitter-patter feet downstairs. Do, 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 do. You can hear it on the carpet, into the kitchen. Again, linoleum floor, back to the carpet. Now, outside of my door, the stairs come straight up to my room. So when I'm laying on my side and looking out my door, I'm looking past where the stairs would be, through this wooden banister into Katie's room. Suddenly I hear the footsteps slowly coming up those stairs, the main stairs. And I'm sitting here going, you have got to be kidding me. And I'm in a waterbed too. My parents bought me a waterbed, those old school waterbeds. So you can't move with that. It's swashing around and making all kinds of noise and everything. And I wanted to sit up to try to look down and see what it was that was coming up, because I could hear it. I could hear it running from the kitchen, back to the living room, back to the kitchen, right inside the living room, stop, and then it starts coming up the stairs. So it's gone 1, 2, 3, I'm almost counting these footsteps. You could hear it, because this was an old house. It was a 100-year-old house. It just, everything creaks, right? So I could hear the footsteps. I could hear the creaking. 4 or 5 footsteps happen, and I lean up to look, but the waterbed sloshes. And right when the waterbed sloshes, I hear it take off running back down the stairs. Badoosh! Goes back off the stairs, linoleum floor again, stops. Don't hear anything. And I'm sitting going, oh my God. Is that little devil demon doll trying to climb the stairs? And if so, how did it get into the kitchen and living room to begin with? That door's locked. So I get the courage to stand up out of my bed and go walk at the top of the stairs. And I'm just looking down the stairs. And there's no footsteps, there's nothing. And I'm just standing there, just waiting. If I hear those footsteps again, and it goes from linoleum to carpet, then I should see whatever it is. Right? So I'm just standing there. I'm like, come on, just show yourself. Just do it. Just do it. Listen, you're terrified of these moments, but the curiosity is so overwhelming. It's almost like the equivalent of the terror, right? So I'm standing there, I'm waiting. And suddenly I hear footsteps again, but it's not the stairs in front of me. It's the back stairwell that goes up to Katie's room. And they're slow at first, just 2 or 3 footsteps that are slow, and then it sounds like it sprints all the way to the locked door with the glass window in the door that's about 6 feet from Katie. I mean, and when I say it sprints, I mean, this thing, I have goosebumps so bad right now. Fuck. Yeah, that was just a terrifying moment. Whenever anything takes off sprinting and you could hear it, and these were not small steps at this point. When they started, they were. You could hear them at the bottom, just, 2 or 3, light footsteps and creaking. And then it's like this thing just took off to the door. And I'm like, oh my God. I hear that thing running up and I'm thinking, oh my God, Katie's like 5, 6 feet from the door. It's my 3-year-old sister. So I just bust my ass and go running around the banister into her room. She's still sleeping. And I stop about 4 feet shy of the door. Now the footsteps stopped on what should have been the other side of the door. And I'm like, that thing should be standing right there. I heard it come up all the way. And these back footsteps, just so you know, they're not carpeted. These are hard wooden footsteps that come up to her room from the entryway. So I'm thinking, it's standing right there. It's right outside that door. So I'm sitting here thinking, what do I do right now? What do I do right now? Well, I got to go over and see, right? I got to go over and see if it is, in fact, on the other side of that door. And because if it is, one, I'm going to lose my mind. I mean, I'm going to freak out like crazy. Two, I'm going to unlock that deadbolt and I'm going to punt that fucking thing as hard as I can. Because, I mean, it was terrifying, but the hatred I had for that thing, I mean, I've never really hated an object in my life, but I hated this doll. It was terrifying. So I'm slowly walking over to the door, and I'm thinking again in my head, it has to be on the other side. It has to be. That's where the footsteps stop. I get about 2 feet from the door, and really quickly I hear the pattering footsteps running down the stairs. Now, these stairs are the stairs that go up to Katie's room from the entryway when you walk in. It's actually 2 stairways. It's a short stairway up, and then there's a landing. And then the stairs revert back the other way, right? So it goes up and back. So there's a landing at the bottom. So as I'm approaching the door, like I said, I get about maybe 2 feet away, and I hear the footsteps like retreat really quickly. And I'm like, oh my God, it's running down the stairs. So I want to try to get a good look at this thing. So really quickly, I just run over to the door. Like I said, it was only a couple feet away, and I look through the square window. And that terrifying little angel is standing facing me on the landing. On the landing, okay? This thing always sat on the second stair. It would have had to move 6 stairs up to be standing on that landing. So I finally have the proof that there's no possible way this is because of a draft. There's no way a draft picked that thing up, this almost 4-foot little doll, and moved it to this landing. And it's not only on the landing, like I said, it's at an angle where I can look down and see its face, and it could look up and see mine. Oh man, I have such goosebumps right now. So to be completely honest, at that time, mortifying as you can imagine, I'm just sitting here going, oh, what do I do, right? Like, what do you do in those moments? You see it, you know it shouldn't be there, it's there. It's a complete mindfuck because you just cannot wrap your mind around what you're seeing. My initial thought was my sister. I'm thinking if this thing's running up to her door and it can move stairs, I'm not just going to leave her sitting here. So I basically go over and wake her up, and she was completely out, didn't hear a thing. I wake her up, I take her to my room, just put her down on the bed, and I'm thinking she can just sleep here tonight. I'm going to watch this door the whole night, which I did. But when the sun finally came up, I did talk to my dad, because he would always get up early to drink his coffee. And I said, Dad, I want you to see something. And he's like, yeah, what? And I walk over, and I open, the door to the entryway, and it's still up on the landing. It hasn't retreated, or it's not back on the second stair. I'm like, look at that thing. And he's like, what, did you move it up there? And I'm like, did I move it up? No, of course not. And he's like, what happened? And I'm like, man, I listened to this thing run, from the kitchen again, into the living room, into the kitchen, into the living room, then up the main stairs, back down the main stairs, up the back stairs to Katie's room. And I even told him the whole story. I said, I'm like 2 feet away from the door. After it went running up to her door, it should have been right there. I look out and it's just sitting there. And he's like, huh. I'm like, Dad, this thing terrifies me. I don't even want to come home. I don't want to come home. I don't want to go to sleep. This is the 3rd time now. Obviously, I assume you didn't move this doll. And he's like, well, hell no. And I'm like, I assume Mom didn't. And he was like, she's laying next to me the whole night. No. I'm like, well, I know Katie didn't, and that leaves me. And I certainly didn't do it. I'm like, I just don't know, why we have to have this thing in here. I know it's Mom's. I know she likes it. I know she bought it at some yard sale or somewhere, but why does this have to be in here? This thing's terrifying. I even told him, I said, Laura came over. She's terrified. My buddy Travis, my best friend, came over a couple times. He was like, what's with the creepy doll? I'm like, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't, it's not mine. I hate it. And he's like, no, I understand. He's like, so it was really on that landing. I'm like, yeah, it was on the landing last night. I'm like, I got Katie up, took her to, my bed so she could actually sleep. And I stood watch at the door the whole night. He's just like, oh my God. Okay, I understand. So I went to school. After school was over, I played basketball for a while. Ended up coming home, and I could see that my dad had the garage lights on. Remember the garage lights? He had these beer lights. And whenever those were on, he was out there. So I go out there, and he had taken, remember my dad was an engineer, right? He had every tool you could ever imagine, these huge, massive snap-on cases and all this stuff. And I'm out to the garage, and he had dismantled that angel into just every piece you could, dismantle it into, and then he created some pieces. He just destroyed the entire thing from top to bottom and threw it away. I love that about my dad, man. Whenever my dad deemed something evil or something had to go, he was a destroyer. He was definitely someone that was like, yeah, I'm going to smash this thing to bits. I'll tell you another just really quick story of another time where he did the same thing. In Katie's room, that scary room that I never wanted to be in, there was these little, they're like storage areas, the ceiling, the roof made like this, like an upside down V, right? But the walls were straight. So if you take your hands and make a triangle with them, so if the walls are straight, it cuts off the corners. And those corners become just like storage areas. And we noticed once, it was funny, we were there, we lived there for like 2 years before we noticed it. But we noticed that in Katie's room, there should have been 4 doors because there were 4 areas, 2 on each side of her room, that were storage areas. But for some reason, and I don't know why we didn't notice it, but on what would have been the north side, when you would get into the storage room, you would, crawl on your hands and knees, almost like a cubbyhole area, and you would go back, but there was a wall. And it should have been longer. Like the one on the south side of the house, stretched the length of her room. The other one stretched about, 4 feet shy of the length of her room, and it was walled off. And my dad was like, huh, so this is walled off for a reason. So what's on the other side of the wall? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. So he decided he was going to get, was basically going to cut through the wall. And he went in there with his hammer and his saw and all this stuff. And he did. He cut through the wall. And there was this oil painting of this woman that we later found out was the wife of the man, Herb Alfers, who built the house. And his wife supposedly died in Katie's room shortly after her child. She had a newborn baby that died of SIDS, which is what was that sudden infant death syndrome, I think it's called. She had a newborn that died of SIDS in Katie's room, and shortly after she died. But her whatever killed her wasn't listed. It just said that she was deceased on this day. So we don't know if she died of some kind of sickness or if she was murdered. We have no idea. But we know there was just this old, 100-year-old oil painting of her that was sealed off. Well, my dad didn't like it. It was a creepy photo. He didn't like it. He didn't like that it was sealed off. He was thinking, maybe this is the source of the haunting. We didn't know. We didn't know anything about any of this stuff, right? Nothing paranormal. We had no history in it, no studies, no nothing. And he's like, yeah, this thing's super creepy. We're going to get rid of this. So he takes it out to the front yard. And he starts out, he just puts lighter fluid on it, and he throws a match on it. Lighter fluid lights, burns all the way down, and the photo's completely fine, or the picture is completely fine. And he's like, huh? Why didn't that burn? So he puts lighter fluid on again, does it again, same thing happens. The photo, the frame, everything, totally fine. And he's like, that's weird. So he goes to the garage, he comes out, and he has a gasoline bucket, just douses it in gasoline, you know. Now, keep in mind, you know, sometimes the best plan when you find objects that may be haunted or, you know, is not to just burn them, but that was my dad's mentality, man. He was like, this could be evil, we're burning this fucking thing, you know. So he came out and he had this gasoline you know, bucket, doused it in gasoline, lights it on fire. Nothing, man. The picture's fine. He's just like, what is going on with this? So this thing should be burning like hell. Like I've lit it on fire like 3 times. So finally he takes it in the garage and he lights up his acetylene torch. Trust me, man. The picture was it was no match to the acetylene torch. And yeah, he burnt the living hell out of it. Then he threw it down. We had this, it was an old, in our yard. I mean, there were so many weird things about this house. There was this massive hole that was in our front yard. It was huge. And I guess it was for, like if there was like tornadoes or things like that, they would climb down into this concrete like hole basically in our front yard. But it's just this square concrete area with this round metal grate on top of it. So we ended up throwing it down in there once he burned it all to pieces and, you know, busted up the frame and threw it all down there. And then there was a bunch of stuff down there that he didn't know what it was. So we ended up pouring a bunch of gas down there and lighting it all on fire and stuff. So that was always my dad's mentality. If it's evil and it's bad, gotta burn it, gotta destroy it, it's gotta go, you know. So needless to say, you know, when I got home, I was incredibly happy to learn that the Christmas Angel Devil doll had met its maker. Dad had took it apart and completely destroyed it. Now remember, no part of my mind felt like, oh great, now the haunting will stop, because things were going on long before this doll came. And again, as I said earlier, I don't think that that doll had any kind of spirit in it or anything like that. In fact, I didn't even know until I saw, once he took it apart, I didn't even know that there weren't even actually feet to it. Underneath the dress, there was like this wooden midsection, and then it was just a single wooden pole that went into a foundation. I always thought there were legs below it. So clearly it wasn't running around. And this is why I always, if you guys have seen Demonic Circle the Sun, one of my films, and when I've talked about demonic cases, and which is what was going on in our house with my mother at the time, that's the big difference between demonic cases versus like a normal haunting. A normal haunting, you'll get like a bang or, you know, footsteps that every now and then you hear, or like a door will open or something like that. Demonic cases are really intelligent. You know, they will work on you. They will use things that you find scary to scare you. Like that's where you hear about, like in certain demonic cases, suddenly like the thermostat in the house will go to 66.6 degrees. You know, it's just like, those are just things that it's doing to try to terrify people. And what I think was going on is whatever was in the house was just using the fact that I was terrified by this doll. For whatever reason, it just struck me as something terrifying the first time I saw it. And I think it was just using it and moving it around and creating these footsteps and doing this stuff just to terrify me to the point that, you know, I wanted to leave the house. I wanted out of there, you know. It's that demonic oppression, you know, where they're trying to just make your life a living hell. And I think it just used this doll to do that. You know, like I said, I learned once I saw him dismantle it, didn't even have actual like legs. So there's no way, you know, the doll had a spirit or anything like that. It was just, yeah, it was just being utilized against me. But having said that, there's still no reason to keep it in the house. If this is a source of fear that is, you know, completely messing my world up, and every friend I have, you know, is walking through the door and seeing this thing and they're terrified by it, there's no reason to have it, you know, in the house. So anyways, I did ask Laura to talk about it. Unfortunately tonight she had a ton of work for her school right now, so she wasn't able to. But yes, I mean, obviously she agreed that it was terrifying. And in fact, when I brought it up to her, she was just like, God, that thing was so evil looking. And I'm like, yeah. But I did always wonder, like, whoever created it, I don't know how they could have created it. And then when they were done, they were like, man, that just screams Christmas and happiness. Because, guys, it did not. It was just absolutely terrifying. Absolutely terrifying, man. So, anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this story. I meant to tell it over Christmas, but when I started telling it the first time I recorded it, I was just very emotional about my pops. I mean, I miss him every single day, guys. I mean, it was just such a big part of my life that is gone. And it's, I mean, I know he's around. I know that, but he's not physically here. And that's, yeah, and yeah, it was just really unfortunate the way he passed away. And when I initially told the story, I wasn't in a good place, and I didn't want to make everybody sad at Christmas time. So I just felt like, you know what, I need to wait a little bit so I could tell this story the right way. Because look, man, yes, it was terrifying. Yes, it was horrible. And there's parts of it that are funny, you know. I mean, it doesn't got to be just one thing, you know. It's all things when I reminisce about it, you know. So. But I've been asked that question a lot. What was Christmas like in that haunted house? And again, it just dawned on me that I had never answered that before. So I hope you guys enjoyed that story. Also, once again, just a quick reminder, today is it. Your last chance to get your discounted 74 minutes pass to watch it on Vimeo on demand. Link is in the description box below. And it's also your last chance to watch my entire catalog on Vimeo. All 20 films for less than $4 a film. One single price that'll save you $80. Don't miss out on it for both offers. Again, today is the last day. I love you guys, man. Thank you guys for listening. As always, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the In a Crowded Room podcast. And I will be back tomorrow with more. All the best.